Chairperson, Securities and Exchange Commission, Honorable Cesar Villanueva, Chairperson, Governance Commission on GOCCs, Honorable Vida Chong, Deputy Insurance Commissioner, Insurance Commission, Ricardo Jacinto, President, Institute of Corporate Directors, Dr. Jesus Stanislaw, Institute of Corporate Directors. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored that the Institute of Corporate Directors has invited me today to speak on corporate governance. Let me start off by saying that I am not the IFC Corporate Governance Specialist. I'm a Senior Investment Officer in charge of Philippine Financial Markets Program for Investments. So I look at corporate governance from the lens of an investor, and that is how I will frame my discussion with you today. When IFC considers an investment, the variables we look at are developmental impact, regulation, sponsors and management, financials, social and environmental concerns, and corporate governance. Corporate governance is an integral part of our investment appraisal process and investment decision making. And from our dialogues with other private equity funds, corporate governance has become more and more important in their internal investment decision making. So when we look at corporate governance in a company, we are really looking at the process and structures the company has in place for the direction and control of the company. We evaluate, taking into consideration the company's stage of development and the environment it operates in. So it's actually a dynamic process as the company moves forward. And why is corporate governance important to IFC? Based on our cumulative track record spanning 40 years of investments, and also looking at over 900 financial institutions that we are invested in today, we can generally say that corporate governance has been an overall positive impact to us as investors. It's one of the ways by which the IFC has been able to safeguard its valuation. For us as investors, the proper corporate governance minimizes potential exposure to reputational risk. Good corporate governance leads to premium valuations going forward as the company's business proposition becomes more attractive and less risky for prospective investors. Finally, good corporate governance has been a positive to our investing companies. It has improved their access to capital and unlocking their lower cost of funding. It has increased our investing company's profile, reputation, and operational efficiency. And it helps the company in the management of risk. As I mentioned, corporate governance is an integral part of the IFC appraisal process. And the IFC methodology has been formally adopted by 20 other developmental financial institutions, including the ADB and certain private equity funds. We at IFC focus on 5 key items when looking at good corporate governance practices. First, we look at the board practices, structures, and this includes committees and board composition. Are the requisite backgrounds and experiences in place to address the needs and concerns of that company? Second, has the company adopted the adequate and or appropriate control environment and processes? For example, is there sufficient staffing for internal audit? Are systems in place for the timely identification of operational risks? Third, is there a good disclosure and transparency policy? This is primarily about the timeliness and accuracy of the information being made available to companies' various stakeholders. Fourth, protection of minority shareholder rights. IFC as a policy never invests more than 20% in the voting shares of a company. We do not consolidate our investments, nor do we invest in companies to run them. So minority shareholder rights is a key thing for us. Lastly, but just as important, is the company and its sponsors committed to corporate governance reforms? As an investor, through our corporate governance assessment, we hope to address and minimize the following major corporate governance risks. First, the boards of the directors are not up to the task of overseeing the strategy and management and performance of the company. This is not only about the lack of capacity of the directors, whether in general or specific to the areas where the company needs most guidance in, but also considers the director's commitment. When a director of a board has too many other board directorships, it reduces that director's effectiveness. In IFC, normally we look at directors having 3 up to a maximum of 5 other directorships than what he normally has to hold. Without adequate board composition and oversight, the company is open to compromising the proper check and balances of its management. Second, risk management and controls are insufficient for the sound protection of the company's assets and compliance with regulations. This could mean that the systems are not in place to timely identify operational breakdowns. For example, in banks, and you've seen a lot of times this happen, you could mask the deterioration of a credit at the account management level if the proper systems are not in place to detect them. Third, financial disclosures are not a relevant, faithful, and timely representation of economic transactions the company enters into, nor the resources of that company. You can compound the problem by having the company release erroneous numbers to the investors and the financial markets. And you can imagine a lot of bad things can happen because of this. Fourth, inadequate minority shareholder rights lead to complications which eventually have to be resolved in courts. Definitely not a productive use of anyone's resources. And as I mentioned earlier, the lack of commitment by the company and sponsor to implementing corporate governance policies and the corporate governance improvement plan if necessary. As investors, we can always discuss corporate governance with the company until we are blue in the face. But unless there's a commitment, we have found in most cases we are better off by not pursuing the engagement. This next slide actually speaks volumes about corporate governance and investor confidence. The results reflect the Global Investor Opinion Survey conducted by McKinsey. Of the funds surveyed by McKinsey, it indicates that in excess of 75% of investors are willing to pay a premium if the investing company exhibits good corporate governance. It's around 78% for Asian companies. In addition, investors are willing to pay an average premium in excess of 20% for companies in Asia which exhibit good corporate governance. In the US and the European Union, it drops to the mid-teens given that a certain level of corporate governance, rightly or wrongly, is being assumed. And why is good corporate governance for our IFC investment? Why is good corporate governance important to our IFC investing companies? We have seen that effective corporate governance can help an expanding company through the creation of formal structures to address issues such as risk management, staffing, and in so doing, reduce the key man risk of that company. Good corporate governance can improve access to finance. We have seen many times that cost of financings with financial institutions have dropped and access to equity investors have improved. It is also our belief that corporate governance is imperative for companies planning an IPO. To all of you who have flipped through prospectuses, you may have become familiar with the following boilerplate risk factors, which are red flags for corporate governance. For example, company is effectively run by a family and their interests may differ from other shareholders. How about company has significant related party transactions? Or the company is highly dependent on certain directors and key employees. Good corporate governance mitigates some of these risks. And for family businesses, corporate governance can be important for succession issues and the management of the family. And a little bit of plug here, for those of you who are interested, you can download a copy of the IFC Family Business Governance Handbook from our website. Also for companies, a well-structured board addresses critical stewardship and strategic direction. The board is not a surrogate for running the day-to-day operations of a company. It helps decide the appropriate corporate structure and management. Otherwise, too much bandwidth is being asked of board members who most likely will not have the time to spend on such activities. Finally, good corporate governance sends a good signal to the company's business partners, customers, employees, and its stakeholders. It actually increases the overall profile of our investing companies, and to an extent, builds goodwill.